It is officially cutting season, and I don't mean that type of cutting. I mean managerial cutting by front offices and GMs. It is the last couple games of the regular season here. I see some managerial let goes here. We have already seen a couple, and it's just going to be more throughout the weekend and into the next week as some of these teams finish outside the postseason. Now, these teams aren't going to waste much time. If teams are going to cut their managers, they already know pretty much right now. They're just going to wait a week, maybe a couple days, go over some more conversations, but it's going to get out here pretty soon where these teams are going to fire their managers or just mutually agree to walk away from each other. That way they can get on to their next managerial hiring as soon as possible. So I got 5 candidates today who I think will get fired. Doesn't mean they will, but I believe these guys are the highest likeliest interest to get fired, and I have a couple of questionables as well as to they also may be on the hot seat and on the way out. I'm going to start with the firings and who I think will get fired, and we're going to start off in Queens. So Buck Showalter, Buck as I like to call him. I think Buck, hasn't done a bad job. Buck Showalter's been in the game forever. I remember him with the Orioles. But he's been with the Mets, he's been with the Yankees, he's been a ton of other teams, obviously, throughout his career. A baseball guy, won Manager of the Year last year for the New York Mets, won over 100 games. But this year, kind of the total opposite. He inherited a dysfunctional team in the Mets. It's kind of ending that way, pretty dysfunctional. I would say pretty dysfunctional. Unfortunately for Buck Showalter, whether it is fair or not, Buck Showalter will be let go. I think the Mets will go in a different direction. They got a new GM. They're going to go into a little bit of a retool here. I'm not saying he will be let go, but I think it's a good chance that he is. I think Buck Showalter is on the definite hot seat this coming week. We're going to go over to the other side of town now in New York, over in the Bronx. Aaron Boone, a guy that I've talked about, Aaron Boone. Whether it is fair on Aaron Boone or not, I think Aaron Boone is probably going to be let go as well the next coming week. The Yankees just underachieved. Of course, they were without Aaron Judge, and to this day, September 30th, the Yankees are still complaining about the Dodger Stadium wall and how it is not padded. There's no protection there. Where Judge pretty much stubbed his toe against the wall, just like a concrete wall. So it is what it is. It's pretty crazy that they're still talking about Dodger Stadium, how it needs to get fixed. But all that aside, it was a big part of the season. It's a big part they're not in the playoffs. Judge was out about nearly a couple of months, so that definitely put a detriment into their season. But Aaron Boone, took over after Joe Girardi. Joe Girardi, who I like, I thought he did a phenomenal job with the Yankees there for a while. Aaron Boone led the Yankees to a couple of LCS trips. They're a Yankee. It's all about World Series or bust. They have not made the World Series in 13 years. 14 years. Boone is probably on his way out. Similar to Gabe Kapler, who just got fired by San Francisco Giants. Farhan Zaidi, I think, is the bigger problem there in San Francisco. Gabe Kapler, who got let go. Brian Cashman is the bigger problem with the Yankees. And Aaron Boone. Boone's probably going to be the scapegoat. Also, a guy that got let go mutually, I would say, Terry Francona. Terry Francona is set to retire and manage the last game with the Indians/Guardians. Terry Francona, whether it is mutual or not, battled some health issues, so all the best to him in retirement. Great baseball guy, been in the game for a while. He is done with the game of baseball, and he'll be retired. The Indians/Guardians will be looking for a new manager here in Cleveland. So far we got 2 vacancies in Cleveland and San Francisco, and I think both New York jobs for managerial positions as well. Now this one is a bit of a curveball here, throwing a bit of a curveball with this one, but I'm going to go John Schneider now. Again, this guy's borderline questionable for me. You could maybe throw on a questionable guy that I'm about to list in a bit for this spot. But John Schneider, the Blue Jays have been kind of touted as a deep team to go deep in the playoffs. Now this is kind of to be determined, right? Because the Blue Jays are going to make the postseason. Now does John Schneider, if he gets knocked out in the wild card round, is his job safe? Do the Blue Jays have to win a round? Do they have to go to the LCS? What is John Schneider's kind of capabilities here? What do the Blue Jays front office think of John Schneider? I think he was just hired last year full time or something like that. So it's going to be interesting with John Schneider. Again, this Blue Jays team is really hyped up. Maybe they're a bit overrated by some. Toronto does have high expectations. So John Schneider is going to be a guy that I'm going to keep an eye on here pretty much this entire postseason. Going out of Colorado now to the Mile High City. Bud Black, this is... I hate to come after Bud Black because, it's the Rockies. No disrespect to the Colorado Rockies at all, but, kind of just, don't get talked about much. And the first time in their history, they had 100 losses, which is pretty crazy to think about. They haven't been all that great, but they haven't been all that bad either. So the first time they reached 100 losses is pretty significant. Not saying it is Bud Black's fault, but Bud Black has been there for a while. He's a great baseball guy as well. Came up with the Padres, and I remember him. Colorado managing a pretty bad Rockies team that's clearly going through a rebuild. Do the Rockies want to give a change of the guard, over at the managerial position? I do question that, whether they want to move on from Bud Black. They did give Charlie Blackmon a 1-year extension for what it is worth, so maybe Bud Black 1 more year there as well. But Bud Black is somebody I think that could get fired in the next week. Phil Nevin is another guy that I think is going to be on the hot seat here for the Anaheim Angels. So Phil Nevin also took over a managerial position after they let go of Joe Maddon. So he took over for Joe Maddon, and Phil Nevin stepped in last year. They kept him around for this year, and obviously things have gone way south for the Angels. They were playing good baseball, but the inevitable was inevitable. Not going to be able to sustain it. So I'm not saying this is Phil Nevin's fault. Like, we knew this. Like, I personally knew this team wasn't going to be good. And so is it Phil Nevin's fault? Again, these are questions that are fair to ask, but the Angels, do they want to hire somebody with more experience? Of course, the Joe Maddon thing kind of didn't work out. Brad Ausmus didn't work out. Like, where do the Angels go from here? I don't know. The complete crossroads. Mike Trout's saying that he doesn't want to go, but he wants to go, but he doesn't. So I'm not sure what the Angels are going to do, but Phil Nevin, guy that I think could be on the hot seat and not on his way out. Those are my 5 guys that I think that are going to be fired. Honorable mentions and questionable, question marks here that I think could be fired as well, but I'm not going to fully say they will be as much as some of the other guys I just mentioned. Dusty Baker, there's been a lot of smoke around Dusty Baker and whether or not he is safe in Houston. As weird as it sounds, the Astros won the World Series last year. They've been good with Dusty Baker, really. But Dusty Baker, he has not got a contract extension. His contract is up after the season. The Astros on the brink of the playoffs here. They're going to make it, I would assume, at this point. But, what is Dusty Baker's future in Houston? Does he still want to manage? There's a lot of question marks there with the Astros. Astro fans calling for Dusty Baker. They don't like the way he manages, the lineups, and some question marks there with Dusty Baker and the Astros. Another guy I'm looking at is down in San Diego with Bob Melvin. So the Padres going through a bit of a crossroads as well. I think the bigger problem with the Padres does lie in the front office with AJ Preller. So, Brian Cashman and Farhan Zaid, I think the problem is with the front office. That is the same thing with San Diego. I think AJ Preller is going to get the boot this offseason. Does Bob Melvin go with them? Does ownership stick with Bob Melvin? The Padres have had a lot of managers over the last 10 years. So do they want to stick with Bob Melvin? I think they should, but I wouldn't be all that shocked if they do go away from Bob Melvin in the offseason. The last guy I'm going to highlight here is Pedro Grifol. Pedro Grifol of the Chicago White Sox. So taking over Tony La Russa, can go from Kansas City. A White Sox team that had high expectations and yet again just flopped on their face. There's some deep problems, deep-rooted problems going on the south side of Chicago there. And, whether it is fair or not to put it all on Pedro Grifol, it's still there. Grifol is a guy they just hired. Will they go another direction? Ownership change, I think it was the GM. So interested to see if Pedro Grifol does stick around as manager of the White Sox. With that being said, though, y'all, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section on who you think will get fired. Do you agree with any of my takes here? With that being said, I'm going to sign off. I do appreciate y'all for tuning in, and I'll talk to you guys again next time. Later.